Toto everyone. Hopefully this is it, I think. Just to help, how many people are from industry or employers in the room? Okay, cool. And how many people are from the education sector? Cool, 50-50. And from anywhere else? Excellent. Okay. I've just got a few slides, but what I am really keen to do is, I'm sure you may have some questions, so to make sure we've got lots of time for questions, but I was just going to run through a few slides, especially about workforce development councils. So I talked very broadly before about the changes that were happening. A couple of things that I didn't talk about was one of the core changes that came about as part of Rove was the creation of Te Tamata Aranui, which is a Māori advisory group which gives advice to both the Minister and the Chief Executives of education agencies about the government's commitment to Māori Crown partnerships. And a lot of the strategies will come from Te Tamata Aranui that will then flow through the entire tertiary ecosystem. We've also got 2 centres of vocational excellence that have been established, one for food and fibre and one for construction, and they're collaborative initiatives which are bringing together industry and providers, industry training organisations, workforce development councils, working on areas specific to their disciplines where we could really make a step change, or we've got a particular area where we really need to improve the training associated with that part of the discipline. Workforce development councils. So they are a really critical part of reform, and as I was saying earlier, they are the voice of industry into the system, and a voice of industry that is much more impactful than it currently is. So they are about having a forward strategic view of the future skill needs of industries, and that's looking across all of New Zealand, and it's about the future, not just about what we need today, but also starting to think about what we need in 5 years' time, so that can then influence the people that are being trained. They have an important role in setting standards and developing qualifications, but also ensuring that once qualifications are in place, that people are getting the skills that employers and industry actually need. They provide advice to TEC in terms of the funding that we give. So we currently fund about $600 million into vocational education. And so the workforce development councils will have a really important role in endorsing qualifications and programs that are actually delivered into the system. And if they don't endorse them, we won't fund them. So that means that industry really gets a say in ensuring that programs that are being that are out there for people are being trained on will actually be the things that employers need. They'll also provide us some advice around the mix of training. So for a specific discipline, should most of the training actually be on the job, or for some areas, is it okay that it can be delivered by a provider with a mixture of some on-the-job training? And they will also have an opportunity to have a brokerage advisory sort of arrangement with businesses as well over time. There are 6 workforce development councils. We've been through a consultation process recently, and so we're just going through the last stages of legislation for establishing the 6 workforce development councils, and they're all being established in a slightly different way to reflect the industries that they represent, and we see that in the governance across the different groups. So I was talking to the services group yesterday, and they have a requirement for 2 Māori members, but also a Pacifica member. For some of the other workforce development councils in their boards, they have a 50-50 Māori representation, and some of them have co-chairs and some of them don't. And those all have been based on the consultation that the interim establishment boards for each of these 6 did out with industry. So that's a formal thing, so that by the middle of the year we're in a position where we can appoint boards to those government councils. And then in parallel with that, there's a huge amount of work going on in an establishment phase so that once those boards are appointed, they can get their operations up and running as quickly as possible. So there's a lot of work including once we'll be able to appoint chief executives to those positions. There is work on the operating model for those 6 organisations. There's work on how they'll collaborate, because one of the really important things for workforce development councils is that they collaborate with each other and aren't in competition with each other. And the funding for them has been designed so that that can occur. They are funded for the functions they do, not the number of learners or qualifications that each of them have. And that's quite a change from the current system. There are some very high expectations from government with respect to Te Reti o Waitangi. So the government's led this expectation in terms of the new Education and Training Act, where there is section 4, which states that the purpose of the Act includes establishing and regulating an education system that honours Te Reti o Waitangi and supports Māori Crown partnerships. That is the strongest statement around Te Reti that we've got in any of our legislation. And so for workforce development councils, what does this mean? It means that we've got a really significant opportunity to work differently with and for Māori partners, and in looking at equity and excellence. There are legislative requirements that have to happen in conjunction with behavioural change across our whole system. So it's not you do one thing, put in legislation and things magically happen. This is part of a long evolving way of working that has to be different as we go forward. And one of the first key parts was ensuring that as the governance forums were established for workforce development councils, that the foundations of Te Reti were embedded in those governance bodies. And last week I was talking to people who are going to choose the people that are going to be on the new boards, and my advice to them was to think about choosing people who have very open minds to a world that is changing and evolving. So someone coming onto a board of a workforce development council is not coming on to something which is just the status quo, because we're looking to improve and change as we go forward. We're looking to incorporate Mātauranga Māori into qualifications for our Māori students. We're looking to ensure that we can respond to the changes of industry and regions as we go forward. We've got NZQA doing work on a whole new qualification system. So the people that are going to be on those boards leading those organisations will be people that have got broad thinking and are prepared to think about doing things in a different way than we've ever done it before. So I talked about what's the difference between an RSLG and a Workforce Development Council. So Luke talked a little bit about RSLGs, and I talked a little bit about Workforce Development Councils. But one of the examples I've used, if you are, say, a farmer, what does that mean? If you're a farmer in Canterbury, you will be feeding into your local RSLG in terms of the needs of skills that you have in the future for your particular business. And as the RSLG puts all of that together and provides that information to TEC, we'll also be working with the Workforce Development Councils to ensure that the people that are being trained to do the work that the farmer needs arrive with the skills that they need to do that job. And so the Workforce Development Council's role is to ensure that when people are being trained, and some of that training could happen on the job, or some of it may happen at a provider, but when they're being trained, they get the right skills that employers and industries actually need in the real world, not things that people think they might need. You know, I had great examples where people tell me that people train to be hairdressers and then don't realise you have to stand on your feet all day and you work at nights. You know, there are some really simple things that we could do better. We're obviously not choosing the right, you know. And the other piece of work that's really important in this space is the careers advice that's provided to people that are learning and training. Because, you know, if that's not the thing you want to do, then you're probably not going to want to invest a lot of time training in something that you're not actually going to enjoy when you finish. So if you're training to work on a farm, understand what that means, understand what skills you need, and make sure that you're really well supported. So the RSLG will give us that regional voice. It will tell us what the communities need, what are the big projects, what are the skills in a region. The Workforce Development Council will make sure that when people are training, they get the right skills. And for TEC, we'll also work with the different providers in a region to ensure that there is sufficient training to support the needs of a region. And one of the jobs we have is going back to RSLGs and Workforce Development Councils and talking them through the decisions that we've made on funding. And if we can't find a provider that can provide the right skills, then we'll be working with providers to say, okay, we need to develop a different program or qualification because this region has this need. So hopefully that makes sense. So that was all I was going to say. But I was quite sure that people might have some questions because I know there is a bit of googly-gook in the terminology and stuff around growth, so I can try and plain Englishize it a bit more in the answers to questions. Has anyone got a question? Don't tell me that that was as clear as mud.
I'll ask a question. So
cool.
The regional skills group
identifies needs in their particular region and advises government. I saw also that the Workforce Development Council has a future strategic view of skills needed. They advise the government.
They provide, both of them provide information to TEC. The difference with the Regional Skills Leadership Group is they also provide that information into welfare and immigration as well. So it's a much more broader range. But part of the information from RSLGs is very relevant to the education sector. And so TEC will take that information. But we'll also put it together with the industry broad national view that Workforce Development Councils will have. And Workforce Development Councils and Regional Skills Leadership Groups will need to have really good working collaborative relationships, because we also don't want them both doing the same things. So sharing data, sharing information. So one of the pieces of work my team's doing at the moment is working with people within MB who are forming the RSLGs and working with our workforce development colleagues and looking at all that data and information and how we share it and how can we turn it into things that people can use. So interim regional skills leadership groups have been putting together reports, and someone in TEC has been taking those and turning them into really nice digestible short form packs that we can then distribute across all of our teams so everyone is aware of the information that's coming out from RSLGs now. And we use it for things like some of our careers work. So we do some work in conjunction with MSD around helping people or looking at particular programs for displaced workers or particular industries or where training might be needed with providers. And so we're already using some of that information. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Cool. Hi.
Hi. A question around terminology. In terms of what gets funded, the word is advice, and then it says nothing will get funded if it's. I mean, normally for most people, advice to government is something that can be taken notice of or not, and often not. So, can you just be quite clear about that, please?
I can be very clear that if a Workforce Development Council doesn't endorse or doesn't say this program qualification is delivering the skills that our industry needs, TEC will not fund that qualification. Now, there's obviously going to be a transition period, like it doesn't all happen as soon as they stand up. But I think especially, and this is just to ensure that when qualifications or programs are being developed, and they're being developed to support industry, that they're actually what industry needs. Because what a lot of industries have said is, well, we say what our skills are we need, but they go into like this black box of an education system and they come out and people don't seem to learn what we actually wanted them to learn. So that's that process. So that's a really definitive change. Yeah. Hi.
Yeah, what will the relationship for the Workforce Development Councils be with NZQA?
With NZQA, so on the, they'll have a close working relationship. There are some skill standards which are currently NZQA do, and they will be transferring into the new Workforce Development Councils. But any program or qualification that NZQA have to accredit and approve, the step before they do that will be that the Workforce Development Council has to enforce it. So they will all be part of that process together. Does that make sense? So NZQA at the moment, they'll talk to people and talk to industry and people, but now the Workforce Development Council will be able to say, yes, this qualification is exactly what our industry needs, or no, it's not, and then NZQA would be very unlikely to approve it.
So would there be a two-step approval process?
It would be, one of the things is working through, it should all be one process. So that's one of the things that the Workforce Development Councils and NZQA need to work out what their operating model is, because they should all be part of the same conversation. There shouldn't be multiple steps. Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you expand on the points about brokerage and advisory services?
I can, but I don't really know what they are. So, and look, that's been quite honest. I have to say that this line here has been quite a grey line through the whole thing. And if you talk to different people, it means different things. What I can tell you it's not brokerage of individual apprentices into workplaces. So that is not. But advising at an industry level and talking to industry about potential training options and things may be a role that Workforce Development Councils do. So sorry, it's a little bit grey. It's one of those things that needs to be developed, but it's not about relationships with individual apprentices or trainees, if that helps. Hi.
Hi, could you talk me through a little bit more? You might have said this and I didn't fully understand, but
That's okay.
How regional skills leadership groups come together, what industries are represented, and how that would shift over time as different industries grow or become more prominent. So in terms of the regional skills leadership.
So for regional skills leadership groups, that's about bringing together a group of leaders from the community. So they're not necessarily all going to be industry based. There'll be a mixture of leaders from the community. But just like Workforce Development Councils, one of the really important things that both those groups need to do is to work out what their engagement strategy is about the people that they represent. So for Workforce Development Councils, it's going to be about making sure they have really good engagement mechanisms into the industries they represent, because they have to represent all of the voices that are in their sector. Just the same as a regional skills leadership group needs to represent all of the voices in the Canterbury region. So it needs to think, even though a group will be of 15 people will be appointed, it's not only the views of those 15 people, they need to think how they're tapping back into the community they're represented and getting their voices from their local iwi, from their, for WDCs it'll be from also the local iwi and hapu, so it's the things that go around both of those organisations which will be really important. Does that help? Yes.
Good afternoon. Looking at this from a slightly different angle, I can see that you're producing a lot of, let's say, mechanisms in place for people to learn, to go through, to get the skills that they need and everything else. Basically, you're putting a lot of cabs on the rank. Are you working with other government agencies and bodies to actually approach people in schools, colleges and things to define exactly what I want? Because you said something before about a person being a hairdresser, if they wanted to do it, so on and so forth. I'm slightly worried we've got a lot of stuff here we can use, but they're not being filled with the right people because they don't know what they don't want.
Well, have I got a story for you? So one of the other things that TEC is currently working on is a couple of exciting things. We have got a program called Inspiring the Future, which has been rolled out to primary schools across the country, which is about bringing role models into those schools and opening kids' eyes about what's possible, so that they don't narrow down their choices when they're thinking about subjects they might want to study, or find themselves, cutting out a whole lot of things. We've been running pilots around the country. It's been very well received in terms of just opening kids' eyes to the sorts of jobs that are out there. So in terms of the plaques, we're currently out there looking for role models. So for people that are happy to give up a couple of hours, maybe once or twice a year, to go into a school and it's a very simple, like 20 questions, yes, no, they ask. And usually the kids do not guess what the people's roles are. And it's always a really good opportunity. So that's at the primary school. But alongside that, we were given some money in last year's budget to deliver a career planning tool. And that career planning tool next year will be rolled out to secondary schools. And it was with the aim that every student in a secondary school will have a career plan. And as part of that career plan, they'll think about what they want to do in the future and what subjects they're taking that will enable them to get there. Once again, not to cut off their choices. So those are the other things, because Rove is just one part of the system, but we're absolutely working on that, because you're exactly right. I mean, how do we ensure that we get enough people into all of the industries and where we need workforces? And so starting right back at primary school is really important. We ran a Drawing the Future research thing last year. 7,500 kids drew pictures about what they wanted to be, and 55% of them only wanted to be about 8 or 10 things. Sportsmen and policemen, and so it was a great piece of research, but we're also really keen to run that again in the future as we start to run programs like Inspiring the Future to see how that changes. So yeah, this won't fix it, but we need to ensure that the system that they're then going into is going to support them, whoever they are, whatever sort of learner they are, and wherever they live, to be successful. Yeah.
Reassuring.
Cool. Hi.
Max from Pukenham.
Hi, Max.
Curious about the third bullet point under the RSLGs. What does that look like? Joining up local initiatives.
Do you want to talk about that, Luke? Yeah. I can, but I might as well. You might as well hear it from the horse's mouth.
One of the key parts of RSLGs and the things that are mandated and expected to do is to be the leaders in the community, and part of that is taking that coordination. So just recognise that there's lots of things happening up, there's lots of local initiatives going on or being developed, and so the task with actually making sure they're all connected up, well coordinated, and quite cohesive to make sure that they're actually fulfilling what's required in terms of what skill gaps are or what needs are. And that they're connected up to other initiatives too, like they are connected up to the WDCs, TDC, education initiatives.
So there are some, there are, like as an example, I was just thinking about in Taitokoro, so right up north, there is a provider subgroup that sort of supports the RSLG, which is them taking those needs and talking to the local providers in that area about the training that's available to connect in to the needs. But it's not the same across all of the country. It's different in different regions. But you'd expect over time regions will start sharing with each other the things that are working well and the things that aren't. So I think Steph told me I'll allow one more question. Anyone's got one? No? Okay.
If I may, the transition of the ITOs, and obviously there is as you put it, a significant change in terms of roles. We work closely with competence, and they talk about lift and shift. How does that go together?
It's a transitional period. So TPQ now has brought together 16 ITPs at the moment, and it's working on its operating model. But one of the things that we're really keen to do is to bring the knowledge and the work that's in the industry training organisations into Te Pukenga as soon as possible, so they can be starting to work together and understand the differences in how they operate. That will take us to that new operating model. And so the lift and shift is a sort of terminology of saying they're not rather than putting people through change more than once, try and take an ITO, as much of it as possible, and just move it to be a subsidiary of Te Pukenga for a period of time, and then it will just transition into the new way of working. But then people can work alongside each other, and as you know, often once people start working alongside each other, you find out all sorts of things, and it makes the change process much easier. But if you're an employer who has currently got apprentices, you'll be dealing with the same people that you deal with today, and you'll be, on that journey as in Te Pukenga as part of that. Why don't I take your question while we're walking down the stairs, or I'll get in trouble. If anyone's got any other questions, feel free to fire me anytime this afternoon. Thank you very much.